Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Well, I'm off my sick bed, was down and out for 48 hours, but I'm back. Last minute preview for the weekend, and we've got the Joseph Parker fight. Frazer Clarke returns, Matty Harris on that card. Plus, we've got the shrimper Jonathan Guidry returning against the husk of Bermane Stiverne. And then also a couple of little bits of news at the end. Some disappointing news for Giuseppe Kusumanu, who was meant to be fighting but is ill. So what we'll do, we'll start with the Parker fight. So there's several things to step through here, which I would have covered in maybe a standalone preview video, but we'll race through them. So the weigh-in has occurred, and you can see here, Joseph Parker and Jack Massey. So this is on the Eubank Smith card. Joseph Parker weighing in 10 pounds lighter than his last fight, 245 pounds, has a significant weight advantage over his former cruiserweight foe, Jack Massey, who, let's face it, they've tried to really big up this week as some sort of David versus Goliath, that this is a Rocky III moment for Massey, but we'll talk about why that's not the case soon. But in terms of Parker and the weight, 245 pounds, much better for Joseph Parker. I know some people have been making excuses about Parker and his weight of 255 pounds for his last fight against Joe Joyce, which he was stopped in. But let's face it, they were coming in heavy regardless. They'd come in heavy against Derek Chisora, and the plan was to do so against Joyce, and they did. And they've obviously realized that it wasn't the right strategy. And there are a few other things that have been said in Fight Week, which we'll cover, because Joseph Parker and his team, lots of excuses about the Joyce performance, and specifically things that may have hampered his performance, but more on that in a moment. But 245 pounds, better weight for Parker, and let's face it, Jack Massey, he was an okay cruiserweight, and now he's stepped up to heavyweight, and it's a grown man's game. Jack Massey is a tune-up opponent, and he is probably going to get battered. Parker's weight probably was somewhat irrelevant for this fight, because he is always going to be in here against a hand-picked opponent and going to be, looking to get that confidence back, batter him, and get a win. And for Parker's sake, he'll be looking for a stoppage. And you can see here, it looks like a grown man versus a teenage boy in comparison. Parker is going to ragdoll Jack Massey in this fight. And the thing is, if he doesn't look dominant, and he's not sort of holding the center of the ring, letting his hands go and beating Massey up and actually putting the hurt on, it's a bit of a lose-lose, because let's face it, this is a confidence builder. It's a tune-up. Parker has got this guy who is an overmatched opponent, handpicked, and he's meant to go in there and do a number on him. And so there is some scope that maybe Massey will hang around and maybe make Parker look bad in some rounds or whatever. But all in all, Joseph Parker has the tools and ability to basically wash Jack Massey here. Massey was an okay cruiserweight, but he's got no business really at heavyweight. He's really done nothing at cruiserweight. And some people may point to his IBO title that he had at cruiserweight, but if you dig into the record, there's not much there. And I've seen Massey fight before. He's just okay. He's never sort of a decent amateur, but he's never fired as a pro. He is cannon fodder here. And the fact that he said yes, well, he's going to get paid probably the biggest purse of his career, and that's why he leapt at the opportunity. There has been some stuff around promotional issues and other bits and pieces, but let's face it, he's fought across a number of different promoters: Hearn, Warren, Dennis Hobson. There's been obviously now Sky and Boxer. Let's face it, he hasn't found a home because he's just not that good. And he's just not that good at heavyweight. And we're going to find that out. So Joseph Parker, by destruction in this one. It may be a case he just beats him up and the referee jumps in at some point. And I think Parker, with his chin, he will back himself against a lighter puncher in Massey. So let's face it, this is going to be Parker by dominance in one way, shape or form. But in terms of, say, the Jack Massey stuff, the David versus Goliath, I mean, even the press releases that have been put out by Duco Events, which is Parker's former promoter, but now David Higgins of Duco Events, manages and advises Parker. And they've been sending out media releases to New Zealand media all week, etc. Obviously, I'm on their media list. I'm from New Zealand. I've been seeing these ones, seeing the coverage in the local news. And there has been quite the sort of, well, there's two things. One about the previous fight with Joyce and some of the excuses, we'll come to that. But two, about Jack Massey and the golden opportunity, which I guess it is in one sense, but his sort of abilities and how he could fare in this fight, and that sort of fantasy fairy tale element has been way over-egged. And even here in this press release, given Saturday's fight night in Manchester is sponsored by the latest movie in the Rocky series spin-off Creed 3, it is perhaps fitting that local lad Jack Massey's tilt at Joseph Parker is being billed as unlikely shot at glory for a plucky, down-on-his-luck pugilist. And Massey says this fight is the golden ticket. Yada, yada, yada. Let's face it, it's probably going to end up being a bit of a nightmare rather than the golden ticket. But I do think that Joseph Parker, and we'll go to some of his comments here, is going to have his way with him. And he says, let's face it, if I lose, I will be way down the standings. It'll be like, where is Joseph Parker? I'll be out of the picture. I'm in great shape. I'm ready to go. When I'm sleeping well and feeling good, I'm dangerous. I've put the work in, made the sacrifices because I know what it takes to win. And the whole feeling healthy thing, that's been something that he's been raising during interviews. And actually, I'll just quickly note, so they had Parker and others within his camp had sort of noted this week in interviews that they were considering Dave Allen. And I don't think anyone really needs to see that. Allen, with his potential, health issues that he experienced before, Parker putting a beating on him probably wouldn't really help Allen's cause. But in terms of the Joyce fight, there's been a lot of talk, and I've say with the interview with Radio Raheem, Parker brought it up proactively, said, I was ill. And then he had to ask someone off camera what he had, which was like, first thing that went through my mind was, that's a bit suspicious that you have to ask someone what you had. Because if you don't know your own body and what you had, you would have been there with the doctor or whatever. And it did make me question as well, if Parker was so ill and under the weather, and then there's been other rumours about maybe Martin Bacoli had sort of put it on him in sparring and he wasn't quite right out of that as well, why would they go through and risk the fight with Joyce if he wasn't, near 100%? Or at least it could impact his performance. But I do think they are underplaying the fact that Joseph Parker doesn't have a great gas tank, and he was trying to throw a lot of big shots early, and he gassed very quickly. I mean, maybe there was a little bit of element of that the weatherness, but shouldn't that have also impacted Parker's strategy on the night? That maybe he should have been a little bit more discerning with his punches early on instead of trying to bomb Joyce out of there, which was always a terrible strategy, as was coming in at 255 pounds. And when people have said, oh, well, he was only that heavy because he was sick, well, I'm pretty sure it works the other way. If you're sick, generally your body is fighting harder, and actually you end up losing a bit of weight, not putting a whole stack on. I mean, make it make sense. So there's been a lot of talk, and there's an old saying, when you're explaining, you're losing. And I think with some of the excuses, and it feels and sounds like an excuse that is coming out regarding health and other bits and pieces, it's really trying to paper over the cracks of what was an underwhelming performance in some regards. Parker didn't fire like they expected. And I said this in a recent Patreon video. Kevin Barry always used to say, there's a version of Joseph Parker that is terrific in the gym that just can't seem to translate over to the ring. And maybe Andy Lee found that out in that Joyce fight. He expected something that Parker ultimately, for some reason, couldn't deliver on the night. But anyway, Joseph Parker to win, Jack Massey to probably come out of it and be forgotten. I think he'll probably end up going back to cruiserweight and start calling out a name regardless whatever happens. And if he puts in a halfway credible performance, he'll probably be calling out some of the cruiserweights in the Sky stable. Maybe even call for a Richard Riakporhe rematch. Probably not get it. On the same card, though, so you've got Frazer Clarke versus Kevin Espindola. So he's a random Argentinian journeyman. You may recall he was on that event in Argentina. It was the WBA event that Jarrell Miller fought on. And Espindola, he actually fought, I believe it was Ivan Deichko. He's recently fought Solomon Dakers. He's tough, he's durable. And I've seen a lot of sort of backlash to this opponent. And it's kind of interesting because Clarke has sort of brought it on himself as well, because you've got, say, at the press conference, and here's just a paraphrasing of it, 2023 is a year we take the blinkers off and push on. Yet after the Kamil Sokolowski fight in late 2022, you know, he didn't perform that well in that fight. He didn't look levels above Sokolowski. Sokolowski was more than competitive. Sure, it was a Clarke win, but Clarke didn't sort of dominate the way that you would expect him to do against Kamil Sokolowski, who's a gatekeeper. He'll beat you if you're not good enough, but Clarke didn't sparkle. I mean, imagine, for example, and he's an Olympic medalist with a decent amount of amateur pedigree. Just compare him to, say, Joe Joyce or Anthony Joshua, who were part of that Team GB setup, won medals in that. If they had fought Kamil Sokolowski, they would have ended him. Clarke didn't. And I think there is an element of, I think, questions at the moment. How good is Frazer Clarke? Was he just a pretty decent amateur, slightly older than some of his peers as he was sort of progressing through? I mean, maybe that flattered to deceive. I mean, there's been, you know, I remember Daniel Dubois sort of saying that to Joe Joyce, but that he was beating up teenagers when he was 30 years old, sort of thing. But Joyce has come through and proven, actually, he's pretty good. I'm not so sure about Clarke. And quite interestingly, there was an interview with Jamie Shakiva, who's also a Sky and Boxer prospect at heavyweight. He was talking in a recent interview that Clarke's just not really doing it in the gym right now, that it's just not quite clicking. And it sort of seemed to be an element. He's trying to build a rivalry there, maybe sort of, you know, play for a potential fight against Clarke. But he also commented, besides the gym thing, that Clarke is maybe not focused in all the right directions, that he's got his mind elsewhere, doing quite a bit of commentating, and that he needs to focus on his boxing. And maybe there's an element of truth in that. But getting back to why Clarke sort of brings on maybe some of this criticism on himself, he said after that Sokolowski fight, so we're rounding back to that, I need to just slow down and have a bit of a slower progression, maybe not be rushed. And so then he goes into this fight with Kevin Espindola, yet saying 2023 is basically going to be a breakout year, take the blinkers off. But then he faces this guy. And he did say in one of the interviews or press conferences that Espindola is a guy that'll come to win. No, he won't. He's relatively negative. Part of his durability is built up in being a guy that's, you know, not, you know, just letting his hands go and swing for the fences. He is probably going to be a bit negative. This will go rounds. And it could end up being a little bit of a lose-lose, because if he is negative to some extent, Clarke might also look a little bit sort of, not hapless, but it won't reflect well on him, because you want someone like him who's heading into his 5th pro fight to be going in there and putting a number, doing a number on the opponent that he's facing, especially with the level of sort of hype that was behind him coming into the pros. You know, Sky and Box have spent a bit of money to get him to the platform, and he's just been ho-hum so far. I mean, and if he keeps putting in sort of so-so performances like the Sokolowski one, no one will be watching for him. He won't be building a fan base. He needs to go in and be actually decimating guys. He's fought better guys in the amateurs and got wins, but we have to remember 3-round fights. And sometimes those guys maybe are at different stages of their development compared to maybe a more experienced and savvy Clarke in the amateurs. Maybe we're seeing things equal out against grown men now who, especially for journeymen, know their role. Kamil Sokolowski knows his role, but if he senses and sniffs a bit of weakness, he will, you know, really sort of play into the fight. And I think Espindola, I don't think we're going to see something similar, but this will go rounds. And on the same, in the same token as, you know, Clarke needs to look good, he also does need rounds. But if he goes in there, gets some rounds and manages to get him out of there, well, that's a win. But if it ends up limping the distance and he looks a little bit, you know, average, and especially if he starts to gas later in the fight, and I think there is a question mark about Clarke's gas tank. People are really going to be questioning Clarke. But moving on to the third heavyweight on the card, so this is going to be really early in the night. So Matty Harris, I didn't even see a photo to download from Sky or Boxer for his part of the weigh-in, but he is apparently facing Guidry. So, I mean, is what it is. It's just a random journeyman. He's looking to advance to 4-0. Sumaj has a record of 3-2. It'll be careful matchmaking. Moving on to another fight card this weekend. Don King presents Clash of the Champions. Jonathan Guidry versus Bermane Stiverne. And as you can see here on screen, I have purchased this bad boy. I'm a maniac, so don't feel like you have to buy it. You can live vicariously through me, through my post-fight review if you want to. But I will note for the post-fight review, I'm probably just going to have some basic photo that won't even be anything to do with both guys, or maybe it's just some random footage all blurred out or something, because Don King loves a copyright strike. And if I have anything, even a screenshot, I've had videos a few times from Don King. It didn't happen last time with the when Frank Warren was involved with Daniel Dubois, but that's probably because of the co-promotion, etc. So, you know, I'm going into this with my eyes wide open in terms of what I can actually do with that, at actually getting tacked with something. You know, it's absolute BS what they do. But anyway, the fight itself. Jonathan Guidry, probably one of the better sort of feel-good stories in the last year or two of boxing, sort of fished out of nowhere. I mean, Don King, even though, you know, scoundrel and, as they say, evil never dies, he does know how to spot talent. And Guidry sort of fished off club shows, the Shrimper. He had a couple of good performances on King cards. And coming off a really good performance against Dakari Scott, stopped him in, what was it, 7 rounds, in a hugely entertaining fight. If you haven't seen it, it's a very entertaining fight. All action. Against Bermane Stiverne, the former WBC champion. He hasn't had a win since 2015. He's just been on a run of losses in between his inactivity. He really is just not that good anymore, and he's, 44 years old, so this has got written all over it for Jonathan Guidry for a win. Seems to be with Trevor Bryan out of the picture right now. They're just obviously trying to fill a card with Guidry and Stiverne. There was originally meant to be Alunga Makabu taken off the card. He was meant to be the main event. So if Guidry comes through this, because he could just outwork Stiverne. I think Stiverne is washed. He has been washed for some time. What was it, the 2017? Was it 2017? And Deontay Wilder sparked him in a round. I mean, that Stiverne, that was 5 years ago. He hasn't got any better. He's no doubt got a lot worse. He's collecting a paycheck here. But the Shrimper, who's significantly younger, significantly fresher, is probably going to get the stoppage and stop Bermane Stiverne. At the very least, I think he's going to let his hands go and have a good crack at trying to make sure it doesn't go the distance. I mean, Stiverne's probably just going to throw some Hail Marys. He's got a bit of power. That's the last thing to go. I don't see him offering too much. I know people will be saying, why did you buy this fight? Well, I'm a sucker for punishment, obviously. I don't like money, apparently. So, yeah, it is what it is. I will be doing a post-fight review, so make sure that if you want to catch what happened, I'll be there to let you know. Also this weekend, Raphael Akpejiori, the unbeaten 14-0 Nigerian who lives in Miami, he's facing a journeyman in Dell Long. So Akpejiori was meant to face Aslanbek Makhmudov at the end of last year. Didn't really get a proper reason as to why. So he's facing Dell Long. Haven't seen the weigh-in, so can't say what his weight was. He's got nothing up on his social media as well, so that doesn't necessarily help. Joe Kusumanu was meant to be fighting this weekend, but he has been taken off the event. He says, I've got some news, unfortunate news to share with you. There is illness on my side, and sadly my bout against Istvan Berneth has now been cancelled. And he's got a little post that I've just clicked to. I trained harder than ever for this fight and done everything the right way. I would like to thank Cess Boxing, blah, blah, blah. I'll be back stronger than ever and we'll update everyone with a new date ASAP. Giuseppe Kusumanu, so otherwise known as Joe Kusumanu. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.